A very warm welcome to you. Many of you will know me by now. My name is Zoe and I'm chair of a small charity called Folio Sutton Coldfield, and what we do is support the public libraries here in Sutton Coldfield by promoting their resources, encouraging footfall, encouraging you to borrow books, join up and become members, and basically fall back in love with libraries if you're not already in love with them. Without further ado, I'd really like to very warmly welcome Dr Andrew Watkins, our speaker this evening. Now, Dr Andrew Watkins is an Honorary Visiting Research Fellow at the Centre for English Local History at the University of Leicester. He retired 5-6 years ago from the Lichfield Cathedral School, where he was head of sixth form, and he now spends his time researching and writing lots of articles on medieval Warwickshire society and economy, and he's also editor of the journal Warwickshire History. So he's a real local expert on this, and I'm delighted this evening that he's giving a talk on some very new research that he's done, research that he's still undergoing and will be, so it has lots more to do, but this is the first time he's giving a talk on it, and it's about Sutton Coldfield before our wonderful great benefactor, Bishop Veysey. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Andrew. I'm going to turn my camera off. Tonight we're doing it slightly differently in that I'm showing the slides, so you may hear Andrew asking me to move things on, and there might be a little delay, as there sometimes is, but we found that worked best with our internet connections. So Andrew, over to you.
Hello, good evening. Thank you very much for inviting me to come and speak to you, and hopefully you'll find of interest what I've been doing. And as Zoe has said, this is a sort of interim report on a much larger project which will go on for a few more months yet. Now, the first thing you will notice is that I've spelt Veysey differently to the way it normally appears. That's the way Veysey is spelt in academic circles, because Veysey obviously is very important in Sutton Coldfield. He's a great benefactor of the town, but he's also a national figure as Bishop of Exeter and as a person in royal service. So there is a lot of stuff written on Veysey, but just not necessarily about his role in Sutton. Have the next slide, please, Zoe. Now, this is the map from the 1656 Dougdale volume, The Antiquities of Warwickshire, and gives a good idea of what Sutton probably was like, probably in the later medieval period in the 15th and 16th centuries. We'll discuss it more. It reappears later in the picture, but you have Sutton with Holy Trinity Church in the centre of the map. Good. You got the park to the left, and then we have the various settlements like Hill and Little Sutton, and then things that mattered to Dougdale, the seats of gentlemen like at Moor Hall and New Hall. Okay, next one, please. The next one. Now, I'll be the first to admit that I'm not coming to a sort of a totally new area which has not been studied. There's much already been done about Sutton in the later Middle Ages, particularly by my good friend Mike Hodder. And this is especially focused on the park and the chase, but others have explored aspects of the town and Holy Trinity Church. And a lot of this work has been inspired by what is already in print, such as Domesday Book, Dougdale's Antiquities, and the minister's accounts of the Duke of Clarence, which was edited by Rodney Hilton in the 50s and published by the Dougdale Society. Next one, please. Now, one of the best of the earlier writers on Sutton is Lucy Bracken, who produced in 1860 the history of the forest and chase of Sutton Coldfield. And on the frontispiece, she puts compiled from the best accessible sources. What you're going to hear off me for the next half an hour, 40 minutes, is compiled from the best inaccessible sources, because it's material that's not in print and only remains in its original form. Next, please. So these are the sources which are waiting there in archives to be studied for Sutton. In the National Archive at Kew, there are further 48 ministers' accounts for Sutton Coldfield, of which the minister's accounts for the Duke of Clarence is one example. So if you're familiar with that source, there's another 48 of them covering the period from the early 15th century to 1547. There are 25 court rolls covering the years 1411 to 1517 held at Nottingham University Library and in the National Archive at Kew. And most of what I'll be talking about today will be in fact based on the evidence in those. And then lastly, there are 18 wills and inventories for Sutton Coldfield that date from before 1547 at Staffordshire Record Office. And they give great insight into people's possessions and piety and their belief. Right, next one, please. I'm also going to talk a lot about views of Frankpledge. So I thought better just go through very quickly. Views of Frankpledge are courts and they're held twice a year. One usually around Easter time and the other in the autumn, usually end of September and October. And they cover all manner of things. Particularly, they will deal with prosecuting victuallers, people like bakers and brewers and butchers that don't follow the rules. They'll deal with pleas of debt, which is like credit arrangements, and they'll deal with agricultural issues for the parish. And by the 15th and early 16th century, the court rolls of Sutton show that there were 4 tithings, that's like a subdivision of the view of Frankpledge, and each contained 2 settlements. So there was a tithing for Great and Little Sutton, Moor and Ashfurlong, Wiggins Hill and Warmley, Mainey and Windley. So those are the jurisdictions of the court. Now, this is an example. Oh, go back one, please. We go back to the start of this sequence, please. There we go. Right, this is a view of Frankpledge here. They're in Latin. This is in the National Archives. The very top bits on the left-hand margin, you can see there the word Sutton, S-U-T-O-N. And if we were to go down, still at that level, we have there Sutton Magna, or Great Sutton, which was the name given to the medieval town. And the title tells us that this was a court that was held on the 27th of March, 1488, which was a leap year. Right, next one, please. Further down, and again in the left-hand margin, we have the section there that relates to Hill and Parva Sutton, or Little Sutton. Below that, we have Ashfurlong. And a bit further down, we have Wiggins Hill and Warmley. Next one down is Mainey, where the E is left off Mainey, which says Main, and Windley. And then a bit further down, we have Burwood, which is one of the jurisdictions of the Chase, which is now in Erdington. Next one, please. And then again, in the left-hand margin, we have 3 other areas of the Chase. We have the Coalfield, C-O-L-F-E-L-D. A bit further down, we have Hillwood, H-Y-L-W-O-D. And then a bit further down, we have Linderich, or Lindridge. So that's how the court roll is laid out, as reports for each one of these areas within Sutton. Next one, please. So, just to give you the context, between 1270 and 1540, there's about 600 small towns in England with an average of 1 for every 8,000 people. And Warwickshire is among those counties with the highest density of them. In the 1377 poll tax, 23% of Warwickshire's population lived in towns, and by 1524-5, this had risen to 28%. And by the end of the 17th century, it's thought that a third of all people in Warwickshire were town dwellers. Next one, please. Excuse me. If we start at sort of the end of the story of the medieval town, we have these reports about how dilapidated and run down Sutton was by the 1520s. And the first person to report this is a man called John Leland, who was a royal servant who is writing in the late 1530s, early 1540s, and who was sent around by Henry VIII to inspect monastic libraries. And as he went around, he left an itinerary of where he'd been, and he does visit Sutton Coldfield. And he's writing about 10 years after Veysey starts to create the corporation. And Leland said, Sutton upon Coldfield, standing in Coldfield Heath. And he commented on the dilapidated state of Sutton. And he said that Veysey was greatly distressed to see its decline and obtained for Henry VIII a new charter to reopen its market. He started to rebuild the houses or to build from new. And he commented on the foundation of the grammar school and Veysey's disforestation of Sutton Chase. Next one, please. Then about 100 years after this, Dougdale repeats the same idea. And he's also very impressed by Veysey's actions. He wrote, the market being utterly forsaken, the town fell much to ruin and the manor place was totally pulled down. In this decayed condition did Sutton continue. Next one, please. Right, just going to give a bit of background on the lordship of Sutton. Right, between 1126 and 1492, Sutton Coldfield and the Park of Sutton were held by the Earls of Warwick, mainly the Beauchamp family, then Warwick the Kingmaker and the Duke of Clarence, who inherits the titles from his wife. And between 1492 and 1528, it was a crown estate. And the park and the wider chase were an extremely valuable economic resource for the Earls of Warwick. Had a hunting lodge with its own chapel, and there was an opportunity to hunt deer, and income could be generated by its 5 large pools, all stocked with fish, the herbage, the grazing rights, as well as the quarry, and vast resources of underwood and timber. And the Beauchamp family, above all, are the ones that probably play a part in the development of Sutton Coldfield. By the 15th century, late 1390s into 1400, there are accounts for the Beauchamp family. And by then it appears that they stopped visiting Sutton Coldfield. By then they're politically very important. They're in the royal administration, particularly Richard Beauchamp, who's depicted here, off his chantry tomb in St Mary's, Warwick, was a key player in the 100 Years' War. So they never really come up to Sutton much after about 1400. And instead, if they want hunting, they've got large parks at Wedgenock, just north of Warwick, and Elmley Castle by Breeden Hill in Worcestershire. And they seemingly spend more time there than at Sutton. And by the 15th century, the manor, including the manor house and the market, was leased out to other people who paid a rent for it and then made money from it. And in 1401, it's leased to their bailiff, John Hutchins, for £6 7 shillings a year. By the 1430s, Ralph Bracebridge, who is Lord of Kingsbury, was also leasing the manor out for £10 a year. And by the 16th century, the Mountford family from Coleshill were living at the manor house in Sutton and also renting the market and towns. And this is no real bad thing for the development of the town, because the last thing which townsmen want really is the lord of the manor living by them, interfering in what they're doing. So normally the lack of a lord of the manor would be regarded as being a sort of a positive thing in the development of a town. Can you have the next slide, please? One thing that is true is that there's some documents at Nottingham University to do with Sutton Chase and Sutton Park. And they show by the late 15th and early 16th century, the administration of the park and the chase was very lax, and that local officials, such as the parker and the sub-bailiff, were making enormous amounts of money by abusing their position to sell timber and underwood and grazing rights and things and fish. Right, next one, please. Right, if we quickly whiz through Veysey's achievements. 1528, In return for £58 rent, he gets the status of corporation for the town, which means that they can rule themselves, self-ruling town. He oversees improvements and enlargements of Holy Trinity Church. He endows a free school, which bears his name. And he builds a moot hall in the marketplace with the prison underneath, as well as 51 stone houses. And he also he has the marketplace laid out, he has the town paved, and he builds bridges over the Tame at Curdworth and Waterorton to funnel travellers into the market and town at Sutton. Right, next one, please. Going to look now at the sort of origins of the town. And historians increasingly, when they're looking at town origins, tend to look at the context of the landscape and the previous people that lived there. And most towns will develop from areas which are already well settled and have people there. Right, the park is first recorded in 1126, and this was in turn part of a much larger area of the medieval Sutton Chase, which extended well beyond the boundaries of the present park and over many neighbouring manors. It may well have originated as a hunting preserve during the late Saxon period. To the southwest of the parish along the Chester Road was the Coldfield, an area of barren heathland associated with the manufacture of charcoal, referred to by Dougdale as the Great Waste called Coldfield. The next one, please. So, we know from the work of Mike and other people that Sutton Park is occupied in the Romano-British period and before. We have this Anglo-Saxon stuff here as well. So it's an old landscape before the medieval period. It's one of the largest North Arden woodland parishes. It's composed of just under 14,000 acres. And within it, there were large numbers of settlements of varying sizes, hamlets, small villages, the town, as well as moated sites and isolated farmsteads and cottages. Go to the next one, please. Right, I've come to Doomsday, and this is the extract from Sutton. Yeah, Sutton got some medieval documents, they underline words by putting a line to the middle of them, which is a bit confusing. So in 1086, the year of Doomsday, Sutton was a royal manor of 8 hides and 1 virgate. It lay in the Arden, which was very impoverished and densely wooded and thinly populated compared to the Avon Valley of the South Warwickshire Feldon. There's large amounts of woodland at Doomsday, perhaps 2,000 to nearly 3,000 acres of woodland. 10 acres of meadow and 22 ploughlands or working ploughs show the extent of the arable lands. And the 22 ploughlands is one of the largest recorded in the north of Warwickshire, exceeded only at Nuneaton. And 22 recorded at Hampton in Arden. 20 villains, 4 boarders and 2 slaves suggests a population of about 120 people in 1086. Although where they live within the manor, we don't know. Next one, please. Right, the origins of the town, Great Sutton. There's a great survey done in 1285 by Edward I to find out what rules and laws, jurisdictions that nobles have. And William Beecham, Earl of Warwick, was able to hold frank pledge, which is the court system, and also the assize of bread and ale, which is a set of rules passed by the Parliament of Edward I to regulate the manufacture and sale of foodstuffs. He also has the rights of infang theof, which is an old Anglo-Saxon legal right, which is to hang criminals caught red-handed. And that is a very highly developed right for a lord to have. And the right of team, which is it's to do with sales of goods and warranty on goods, which again, they go back into sort of Saxon laws, but they're not in every manor, they're only in sort of towns usually. He has the right of tumbrel, which is it's like a cart with no wheels, which is used to drag around traders who had infringed the rules, often brewers or bakers, had the right of free chase in the chase and the right of waifs to take strays in. Now, these are all very highly developed jurisdictional rights, and they may be a relic of Sutton Coldfield's status in the late Saxon period. Next one, please. Obviously, neither of these places are in Sutton. These are two examples of towns which develop around large lordly hunting parks or large lordly hunting preserves, where, as at Great Sutton, you'd have high status people coming to stay there. You'd probably have people producing food and specialist goods for the lords and their people that come to enjoy the hunting. Now, both these towns here, it's Bewdley on the River Severn in Worcestershire on the left and Woodstock in Oxfordshire, both develop as towns around large lordly hunting parks. And it may be at Sutton, this is the same model that happens there, that the people coming in when the Earls of Warwick are still hunting at Sutton, there's enough people coming in to generate the need for a town. Right. So it appears by the late 13th century, the Earl of Warwick is trying to develop a town at Sutton. And in 1300, Edward IV grants Guy Beauchamp, Earl of Warwick, a weekly Tuesday market and an annual fair on the even feast of the Holy Trinity. Holy Trinity is not a good time to have a fair. Fairs tend to be things where you have a lot of sale of livestock or agricultural produce. And obviously Trinity, depending on the position of Easter, can be quite early in the agricultural cycle of the year. So it doesn't always help to have it on Holy Trinity. If we move on, please. Sorry. So there's other market charter. A second one in 1353 adds a second fair around the even feast of St. Martin, which is in 10th and 11th of November. Traditionally the feast where the animals are slaughtered to be salted down for winter. And this is added to the Tuesday markets and the Holy Trinity Fair. And in 1519, another market charter moves the market day to a Monday and the fair on the eve day and morrow of the Holy Trinity, and another on the morrow of St. Crispin and St. Crispian Ian on the 25th of October. And these are all confirmed when Veysey gets the corporation running in 1528. Next one, please. Just to give you the context of the other markets and towns surrounding Sutton, if you like, the competitors to Sutton, we have Tamworth, which goes back into the Mercian royal past. Not an expert on Anglo-Saxon towns, but they're all markets and all minster churches. Lichfield is chartered somewhere between 1149 and 54. Birmingham's just slightly later than that. Coleshill, 1207. Warsaw, which is probably the main town to the west of Sutton, chartered in 1220 and created a borough around 1235. And the only market in the area that's much later than Sutton's is at Fazeley, presumably on the A5, on Watling Street as it then was, established by Ralph Bassett of Drayton. Right, so we're going to have a few pictures now of Sutton and just talk about the layout, the topography. Right, Holy Trinity Church. I fortunately went on an open day there in September and got this excellent new book on Holy Trinity, which is very good. And I know from that the oldest parts of the present building are sort of in the chancel, and they're sort of mid-13th century. So this church, the oldest part is mid-13th century. First priest is recorded here in 1250, but that's the very first register of the Bishop of Lichfield. And in 1291, Pope Nicholas tax, it's up and running and it's endowed with a lot of glebe. I know from work of Roger Lee, which Mike Hodder put me onto, that there is a deed from Walleran, the Earl of Warwick, between 1184 and 1204, which mentions 3 priests from Sutton. So it may be, as in many areas in North Warwickshire, that churches appear in the landscape well before they're recorded. And it may well be that this building is a successor to a sort of wooden structure early on. Next one, please. So if we go back to the map in Dougdale, can we do the Lichfield Road, please? So we have this major road coming down from Lichfield that goes to Birmingham. And this is on what's called the Gough map, which is a map made in the 14th century of the roads of England. And it's sufficiently important as a routeway of national importance to be shown on that map. Sutton isn't, but the road is. Can you pick out Coleshill Road as well, please? Coleshill Street. So we have the convergence of 3 routes, one from Birmingham, one from Lichfield, one from Coleshill, that all come together in what was Sutton's marketplace. Next, please. Now this is, we'll get a better close-up of this in a minute. This, I think, is the first sort of reliable map of the centre of Sutton, which is done by John Snape in 1765, who produced maps for many surrounding places like Atherstone, Coleshill and Lee Marston. And again, could you just trace, oh, yeah, we go there. Yeah. So you've got the extent of the houses, which are shown here, probably is not going to be too dissimilar to the medieval town. It's unlikely to be significantly bigger. So I think it's pretty good indication of where the medieval properties probably were. The only pity with this, there are no back boundaries on, because often they can be very helpful in determining when things have been laid out. Next one, please. So we have here essentially me risking life and limb to take this picture. It's the road coming in from Lichfield and the start of the triangular marketplace. So route coming in from the north, going down Mill Street onto Birmingham, and then to the right-hand side going eventually to Coleshill. Next one, please. And then if you look at the Snape map, and Zoe's kindly sent some photographs to me to look at as well. What's now called the Veysey Gardens is a very sort of busy area in the past, isn't it? There's lots of property on it. It may be a large marketplace which has been built on or infilled. I need to do more work on this and get the advice of experts on it. But essentially, we're looking at the marketplace, medieval marketplace. I've seen photographs where it's called the pepper pot, isn't it? Like a toll booth, and it's all built up. But that may be a large marketplace which has been encroached on. Next one, please. So if we just look at that area on the map, please. So it's that area, there's lots of buildings. It's quite tightly packed, fronting onto the market. So this is the sort of the key area of probably trade and transactions in medieval Sutton. Next one, please. I had a very helpful day with Mike Hodder before Christmas. We sort of walked up here, and this is more or less where the medieval town probably ended. It may have gone a bit long past the railway, but essentially this is the sort of the limits to the north of the medieval town. There may be odd things beyond it. Next one, please. Historians of medieval towns are often looking at layouts of buildings and size, and they're trying to work out if the town has been laid out, if there's like regular plots of land. And it's very difficult at Sutton to work it out, because we don't know what was laid out in 1300 when the town was probably the market charter came, and we don't know what was done by Veysey in the late 1520s. Next one, please. But it's not too fanciful to look at these properties and start thinking, well, there's a certain regularity of size about them, although we need to do a lot more work on it. Having said that, the white building obviously is clearly much bigger than the two next to it to the right, but there is some sort of regularity of size. And I know from what Mike Hodder told me that a lot of these sort of Victorian 18th century buildings, which these are when they're examined at the back or examined inside or in the roof spaces, a lot of them have got medieval framing or medieval elements in them. Next one, please. And similarly on Coleshill Street, and some of the properties over there have been were excavated 20 years ago, and they showed again facade, much later facades of brickwork, but within them there was sort of evidence of much earlier buildings and slight industrial activity. And the next one, please. And then looking down Coleshill Street, the medieval town probably about as far as the White House just beyond the car. That's probably the extent. And again, Mike Hodder was telling me that is a medieval house in the framing of it. Next one, please. And then Trinity Hill, leading down to what's now the Parade or the road to Birmingham in the Middle Ages. This is known as St Mary's Hill in the medieval documents. First in 1422 is the first reference at the moment I've got to it. Okay, next one, please. Right, so now we're on to the traders and crafts. What sort of craftsmen are in Great Sutton? There's a good range of non-agricultural activities. There are metal workers, smiths, quite specialist people making horseshoes and tools and bridle pieces and bits. There's woodworkers mentioned, coopers and cartwrights. And there are mentions of weavers and tailors to show there's a cloth industry here. And also there's evidence of leather craftsmen in Great Sutton. Next one, please. A lot of the people mentioned in the court rolls are presented because they are victuallers. They are producing beer or bread, or they're butchers, or they're selling wine or something like that. Now, the most numerous were brewers and ale sellers, with somewhere between 8 and a dozen regularly fined in the 15th century courts. But in 1424, there's 14 brewers, so it's a big thing. And they're catering for travellers coming through on the road from Lichfield or Birmingham. They are selling to people coming in to the town to trade in the market, and they're selling to the people that live in Sutton, because by the 15th century, most beer is bought like as takeaway and taken back to your house to drink. There's usually 4 or 5 bakers mentioned in the court rolls. Most are in Sutton, some of them are innkeepers, of which a bit more later. And occasionally you get village bakers from Erdington come up to Sutton to sell in the market as well. Next one, please. Right, butchers were also presented. They're always in trouble for not disposing of blood or offal or lights properly. So they're blocking roads or jamming up gutters with bits of animals they can't sell. And the next one, please. Right, inns. We tend in modern parlance to mix up pubs, alehouses and inns. In medieval and early modern England, they're very precise what they mean. Inns are at the top of the hierarchy of drinking places. It's a place where you can get accommodation, you can get food. It's often where traders meet outside the market to transact business. And they'll also put up your horses and do livery for them. In 1494, there are 4 innkeepers recorded in the court rolls. And in 1498, there are 5. And the names of 3 of these inns have survived. In the Duke of Clarence accounts for 1479 to 80, there's one called the Bear, which must be a reference to the Earl of Warwick, his badge. And through Zoe's good offices, she's found some stuff out which it might be traceable to somewhere not far from where Bishop Veysey's school is. So that's quite an exciting development, and I look forward to following that up. And in 1527, 2 more inns are recorded. There's one called the Swan, which was worth £5, 6 and 8 a year, and one called the Checker, which yields 26 shillings and 8 pence. Next one, please. Now, we also know of the from the what's called pleas of debts in the course rolls, we know where people are coming to buy and sell at Sutton. Now we know that there are people coming from the big local towns, Birmingham, Coleshill, Lichfield and Warsaw. Traders are coming from there perhaps to sell at the market or buy stuff to take back. But also, I'll just reel these off in alphabetically. Aldridge, Aston, Bloxwich, Camwell, Beardworth, Drayton, Bassett, Erdington, Great Bar, Hampstead, Handsworth, Middleton, Minworth, Shenstone, Waterorton and Wishaw. There's all people coming from those areas. There's also quite high status people coming to Sutton to buy things. Different priors of Camwell appear in debt for stuff they bought in the market at Sutton. They haven't been able to pay for it. We know Sir Henry Willoughby, who lived at Middleton Hall and had household accounts in the 1520s. He comes to Sutton, to the fair mainly, and they buy pots and pans and they have pails repaired by a cooper at Sutton. But he also buys green satin ribbon for his wife. So again, it's quite high quality stuff available at Sutton. And Sir William Mountford at Coleshill, he comes over to Sutton in 1434 to meet his steward from Aldridge, which is one of his estates. And it's nice to think of them perhaps sat in the Bear or the Swan or something and eating and drinking while they're talking about what's going on in Aldridge. Right, next one, please. Right, we're into the sort of home straight now. Piety, church, influence of the church is very important in small towns. And all small towns have different religious groups, different religious institutions. Apart from the church and the services, they'll probably have side chapels, they'll have chantries where prayers are sung for the dead. They will have parish guilds, which are like organisations, sort of fellowships, and often schools, all developing town churches. From the wills and material done at the time of the dissolution of the chantries and guilds, it shows that by the mid-16th century, Holy Trinity Church supports both a chantry and a parish guild. And there's a school first recorded in the 1520s, that's before Veysey, but it's likely much earlier in origin. Next one, please. Now we know that Veysey is rightly praised for making extensive additions to the church in the 1520s and 1530s. And particularly he builds the sort of side chapel in which he's buried, but also he does a lot of other stuff. He pays for an organ, which is an instrument one would only expect to have in medieval town churches. There's a survey done of Edward VI's reign about church goods, which some of you may be familiar with. And church organs are only in places like Birmingham and Coleshill and Stratford Guild and Solihull. They're not widely about in other parts of the diocese. So Veysey does a lot of stuff at Holy Trinity, but the fabric of the church suggests that it had been enlarged in the late 15th century, with the nave lengthened and the west tower built. And this suggests three things, really. It suggests, firstly, that it's quite a wealthy place if it can afford to extend and build onto church. Secondly, it shows that they've got great resources in Great Sutton and the parish of Sutton to do it. And it also suggests the presence of parish guilds or chantries where parishioners are gathering together and raising funds to pay for this extension work. Now, the problem with these, they're called lights or guilds or fraternities, they have virtually left no records. So it's very hard to absolutely say they're there. You're looking for incidental evidence of it, of which I'm about to share with you. Next one, please. Right, this is Coventry, which is the biggest, most powerful guild in Warwickshire, if not the Midlands. And the chantry certificates of 1548, which are done by Edward VI government, show that there was a chantry in Holy Trinity Church. That's a chapel where prayers are sung for the dead. And this was endowed by Thomas Broadmeadow, a rich draper from Coventry, but originally from Sutton Coldfield. Unfortunately, his will of 1491 survives. That's in the National Archives. And this shows he'd bequeathed 40 shillings towards the repairs of the fabric of the Holy Trinity Church, as well as £10 towards repairing the highways between Coventry and Sutton. And he also leaves money for a priest to sing a high mass and pray for his soul and those of his family. And chantries don't have to be funded by a big donation from a wealthy man. They can also be maintained by lots of much smaller gifts from people who are not as wealthy. So there's evidence of the chantry. Right, move on please, next one. That again is not Sutton, it's Henley and Arden. But this is an example of a guild in another Warwickshire town. Now the parish guild is, the parish guild's one of them that is hinted at by the will of Veysey's brother-in-law, John Leveson, but it might be pronounced Lewson possibly. It's the way it's spelled, it's like probably Lewson, they say. John Lewson, who is Veysey's brother-in-law. And when he died in 1539, he requested to be buried in the chapel of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Chapels of the Blessed Virgin Mary, very common, nearly every church has them, but they're nearly always guilds or fraternities. So there'll be groups of parishioners that raise funds for that. St Mary's Hall is recording the Duke of Clarence accounts. And St Mary's Hall looks to me to be a guild hall or a church hall. And there are references, I think, in the 16th century, it being somewhere below Holy Trinity, below the churchyard somewhere. In other Warwickshire towns, Coleshill and Nuneaton both have church houses next to the churchyard, where eventually the schools are held. Mansetter, whose parish Atherstone, the town of Atherstone lies, that also had a guild hall next to the church. So I think what we have here, St Mary's Hall, is a guild hall for St Mary's Chapel in the church. It's rather like a church hall would be today. It would be a place where the parish could use it for fellowship. They could have meetings, they can rent it out, and also they can be a classroom for schools. Next one, please. Right, it's very well known about Veysey's school being founded in 1527. But Sir Henry Willoughby's household accounts show there was an earlier school in the 1520s. In 1521, he gave a reward of 4p to Mr. Worth's child when they went to Sutton to the school. And he sent his third son, Hugh, was taught at the school in Sutton as well, because in 1523, Sir Henry Willoughby gives the schoolmaster 10 shillings to support his son's education. His son Hugh is an early explorer trying to find the Northeast Passage, and he freezes to death on his ship, which becomes locked in ice in the 1560s. So we have good evidence at Sutton of a chantry, a school. Most of the towns in Warwickshire have schools, they all have famous schools like Coldfield in 1520 or Atherstone in 1563. But for both of those, there's evidence of a school much earlier. And I think that's true at Sutton as well. And here, the teaching will be done probably by the chantry priest as part of his duties, or one of the other clergy attached to the church. Next one, please. Right, just a bit now on how Sutton was governed before incorporation. Often with these groups and churches to do with guilds or fraternities or chantries, you have organisations within churches that give townsfolk the opportunity to gather away from the oversight of the Lord and their officials. And it gives them practice in supervising funds and employing priests and managing property in schools. And it may well be, and this is the latest thought among other historians, that organisations such as this gave townspeople the opportunity to organise themselves. If we move on, not with the same slide, when Bishop Veysey founds the school in 1527, there are 21 fefis or overseers. And these appear to show what's called an oligarchy, the sort of a ruling elite of Sutton are managing this school. Of these 21 fefis, 5 are members of Veysey's immediate family. 5 went on to become wardens of the Corporation of Sutton. There's a tax in 1524 called the lay subsidy, and this suggests that almost half the fefis of Veysey's school were drawn from those assessed to pay the highest amount of tax in Sutton Coldfield. And these included Veysey's brother, Hugh Harman, who paid the largest amount of £36, and their brother-in-law, William Gibbons, who paid the 3rd highest amount with £25. So, admittedly on sort of quite slender evidence, we have a sort of an oligarchy, a sort of a ruling elite emerged focused on the school. In 1528, the town of Sutton Coldfield was incorporated, and for an annual farm of £58, the Warden Society of the Royal Town of Sutton held the town manor and lordship free at Chase Park. I should have said earlier that the wills from the 1530s, they often call it King's Sutton rather than Great Sutton. And in one account, they call it Church Sutton, again, because of where it is. So the corporation had responsibility for collecting rents and the profits of the town or lordship, and to be used for the relief of the poor of the town. And this was based on a fellowship of 24 chosen for life from among the most discreet inhabitants of the town. And the group selected a warden from among themselves, who also acted as a clerk for the market and coroner of the town. And the first warden was William Gibbons, just mentioned, who lived at Newhall, Veysey's brother-in-law, an innkeeper, but the first warden of the corporation. Next one, please. Sorry. And just sort of round off the population of Sutton. It's difficult to work out because these are population for the whole manor and not just the town. 1086, said before, there's probably about 120 people here. In the 1332 lay subsidy, there are 64 taxpayers, and you multiplies 5 for this, and that's just about 320. And then the 1524 lay subsidy, 61 taxpayers paying £9, probably population about 400. Now I know from talking to Zoe that by the time of the sort of early 17th century, it's gone up massively since then. But in the 1520s, it's about 400. Now, as I said before, that's for the whole parish, not just the town. When I did work on Coleshill and also on Solihull, which are also towns within big parishes, there it's about 75 to 80% of the people lived in the town. So if that's the same as at Sutton, that gives you 80% would perhaps be in the town. Right, lastly. So just to sort of sum up, I started out doing this during lockdown because I've got the court rolls photocopied, so I've got something to work on. And I've not really got as far as I'd hoped because I'm not being able to visit the National Archives and other record offices. But I started off wondering whether Great Sutton really was a town, which I think certainly it is. It deserves to be a town, known as a town. It ticks all the boxes. It's got a planned layout, it's got a market, it's got lots of by occupations, it's got victuallers, it's got seemingly surviving 2-3 story buildings from that period. Where it moves on from is I need to tidy a lot of it up. I also, and I didn't want to overstretch the talk, there's a lot of stuff at University of Nottingham Library when there are complaints being made in the late 1530s, 1540s about the way in which Sutton is being ruled by the extended Harmon family, and there's complaints about how they're exploiting the estate for their own benefits. So that's another area which you'll need to look to. But Sutton, thriving town, and it's good it still retains its character. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I can hear across Sutton and beyond, Andrew, everybody applauding you and saying thank you very much for such a stimulating and eye-opening talk this evening. You've certainly raised quite a few new things for us to think about here, those of us who are passionate about Sutton's history. So the mentioning of the school that was in existence before Veysey's established the school, that's very interesting, and discussion around the chantry and the parish guild, I think, opens up lots of questions about St Mary's Hall. So that's fascinating and tantalising. And otherwise, please all stay safe and stay well. And I hope very much that I shall see you soon at another folio event. Thank you. Good night.